What's up, everybody? Welcome to another music lesson. My name is Steven. I'm a music teacher and a multi-instrumentalist, and I've been working in the music field as a songwriter, performer, and a teacher for about 15 or 16 years now. And this is going to be what will probably become lesson 2, video 2 in our music basics lesson series. So I want to welcome you guys to the channel. If you want to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, things like that, leave me some feedback down below in the comments. That would really help me out a lot. But today we're going to get into what are intervals. Now, in the first lesson in the series, we went into what is the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale is 12 notes that are separated by half steps. And regardless of who you are in music, whether you're amazing, whether you're just starting out, whether you've been working in the field for a long time, or you just want to play kind of kid songs and things like that, you're going to be using what's called the chromatic scale. So even if you've played like almost zero music, if you've played music before, you've used the chromatic scale. The same thing exists with intervals. If you've played music before, you've played intervals. Now, what are intervals? Intervals are the space between two different notes. Now, I guess you could say if you've only played one note over and over and over your whole life, then you have not played an interval. Like right now, I'm playing a C over and over and over. Now, I have not played an interval yet there because I've only played one note at a time. But the minute that you change different notes, I'm playing different intervals right there. And every interval has its own name and its own sound. Now, at the end of the last video that I did, we explained that the half step is the smallest interval in music, and the whole step is the second smallest interval. And a half step is one key regardless of color, and a whole step is two keys regardless of color. So now you can move by 3 keys, you can move by 4 keys, you can move by 5. You can move by 88 if you want. Some pianos are even bigger than 88 keys. But anytime that you're moving by a certain number of half steps, you're moving by a certain interval, okay? Now, since there are 12 notes separated by half steps in our chromatic scale system, this interval of an octave is 12 half steps. Okay, let's count it. You got C to C sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so they're 12 half steps away. So that's the 3 intervals that I would recommend that people learn first are going to be a half step, 1 key, a whole step, 2 keys, and 12 half steps, which is called an octave. And an octave is pretty easy to find because it's just a note, and then you go to the next version of that note up the piano. Now, today, I don't have another camera shot today, so we're going to have to kind of use our ears a little bit here. But what you're also going to want to learn, and today's lesson is not going to be about naming every single interval. It's basically we're going to just talk about what intervals are. I'm going to try to keep these videos to about 15 minutes or less. So we're going to get into naming all the intervals in a little bit. But for instance, we give our half step, like Jaws, bum, bum. That's an interesting thing that I didn't think about till I just said this right now. One way to learn the intervals is to learn them inside of famous music riffs and things like that. So you got Jaws, bum, 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 bum. And then one for an octave is Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Somewhere over the rainbow. So if you're playing a musical piece, inside of any musical piece, the whole thing is just intervals. So that's a way to start training your ears to hear what intervals are by their name, is to know them from famous musical pieces. That's my point. So far we've learned a half step, or if you start on a different note and you start from C sharp to D, that's the sound and the name of a half step. So the next one is a whole step. You got from C to D, which is 2 keys regardless of color. And if you go to a different key, you can go from C sharp to D sharp. My point is to train your ear to hear what these intervals are. But equally important is knowing how many keys apart they are on the keyboard. Now, this is an important thing that I'm going to stress. Anytime we talk about intervals and music theory, I'm going to stress that C and D are not one key apart. D and E are not one key apart. That's called a whole step, which is actually 2 keys apart. So I know we covered this in the last video, but you're going to want to get good at saying and playing your chromatic scale by half steps going up and down. When you learn the alphabet when you're young, you don't just, you don't learn the alphabet, now I know my ABCs, and skip certain notes. You say all of them in a row, and then you learn probably in the same class that certain letters in the alphabet are used less often. Okay, but you still don't neglect Z. You don't neglect X. You learn the whole ABCs all the way through, and yay, I learned my system. What you're going to want to learn is your entire system by half steps. So if you look over here, C sharp and D sharp are a whole step apart. 1, 2 half steps. D sharp and F sharp are 3 half steps apart. That's its own interval. Again, we're not going to be covering the names of all the different intervals today, but for the sake of your knowledge, 3 half steps apart are what's called a minor third. 1, 2, 3 half steps from D sharp to F sharp. That's called a minor third. One quick comment about how to navigate the piano using intervals. It's like a board game, okay? This is one thing that I frame in music lessons to try to get people to be able to navigate up and down. You're on the space known as D sharp. You do not count D sharp when you're going through intervals. You're on D sharp. You roll a 3. 1, 2, 3 up from D sharp is an F sharp. So this was kind of the video on intervals. It was a little bit shorter than the last one. Let me know below in the comment section whether I went too fast or whether I'm not breaking things down enough. But just to review, an interval is the space, but it is the name and the sound of the space between 2 keys. Whenever you're changing notes, you are performing an interval. Okay, if you play C over and over and over, that's not an interval. That's just 1 key over and over. But anytime I move from C to something else, either in theory or in practice, I'm doing a certain interval. You can move by 1 half step, that's the smallest interval. You can move by 2 half steps or a whole step. That's the second smallest interval. Up by 3, up by 4, up by 5, up by 6, up by 7, up by 8, up by 9, up by 10, up by 11, up by 12, and when you go up by 12 or down by 12, you're doing what's called an octave. The way I know that is the chromatic scale, the system that we are using, is 12 notes separated by half steps. So those are intervals. You're going to be doing those a lot in music. And even before today's class, if you had played music before, you've already done intervals. You just today we're talking about what they're called, the fundamentals of how to talk about music. And that's a quick thing that we can say about what these classes are before we transition over to an instrument or something like that. One of the reasons I've had so much success on multiple instruments is my mind and my vocabulary of how I understand music. One thing that one analogy that I say to some people is, does the hammer swing itself? What's more important, the tool you're using or the person using the tool? And what I've found success in is kind of in improving my tool belt and improving my ability to use tools. So if you put a new tool in my hand, whether that be recorder or ukulele or whatever, I can basically navigate my way around the instrument pretty quick, because my tool belt is strong and my vocabulary and my brain that interacts with the musical tool is so effective. So I could go on and on about all kinds of different stuff, but we want to keep these videos pretty quick today. But this was an explanation of what is an interval. And the smallest interval is a half step, 1 key. Second smallest interval is a whole step or 2 keys. And they have different names, sounds up from there. So you want to learn your intervals really well if you want to be a competent musician. Have a good day.